A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lina, from Lina's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Storm That Changed Everything. The coffee mug shattered against the marble floor of the executive office, sending ceramic shards skittering across the pristine surface like fallen stars. Isla Morrison's hands trembled as she stared at the mess, her heart hammering against her ribs with a violence that made her dizzy. Not now. Please. Not now. Miss Morrison? The voice cut through the fog of her panic like a blade, deep, commanding, tinged with something that made her skin prickle with awareness. Are you quite all right? She couldn't look up. Couldn't face those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through every carefully constructed wall she'd built around herself. For 3 years, she'd been the perfect secretary to Kieran Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries. 3 years of pressed blouses, neutral smiles, and keeping her head down. 3 years of pretending she didn't notice the way his presence filled a room, or how his rare smiles made her stomach flip like she was 16 again. 3 years of hiding what she really was. "I'm fine," she whispered, dropping to her knees to gather the broken pieces. Her fingers shook so violently she could barely grip the larger fragments. "Just clumsy today. I'll clean this up and get you another. Leave it." The command was soft but absolute, and suddenly his shadow fell over her. "Isla, look at me." She'd never heard him use her first name before. In all their professional interactions, she'd been Miss Morrison, a careful distance that had kept them both safe. But now, with that single word, something shifted in the air between them like the moment before lightning strikes. Slowly, she raised her eyes. Kieran Blackwood was everything the business magazines said he was. Devastatingly handsome in that sharp-edged way that spoke of old money and older secrets. Dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. A jawline that could cut glass. And those eyes. God, those eyes that seemed to hold storms and shadows in equal measure. But today, something was different. Today, he was looking at her like he'd never seen her before. Like she was a puzzle he was desperate to solve. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice strangely rough. She glanced down at her palm where a thin line of red welled from where she'd gripped a shard too tightly. "It's nothing. Just a scratch." "It's not nothing." Before she could protest, he was kneeling beside her on the expensive Persian rug, his larger hands carefully taking hers. The moment their skin touched, electricity shot up her arm, and she gasped. He went perfectly still. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The storm outside chose that moment to unleash its fury against the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain lashing the glass like tears. The lights flickered, and in the brief darkness she could have sworn she saw something wild flash in his eyes, something that made every instinct she possessed scream both run and stay. "Kieran?" His name slipped out without permission, barely a whisper. His grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly, and when he spoke, his voice was different, rougher, hungrier. "What are you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She tried to pull away, but his hold was gentle, yet immovable. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His thumb traced over the cut on her palm with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Your scent? It's different today. Changed. Like ... He paused, nostrils flaring slightly as he breathed her in. Like wildfire and mountain snow. Panic clawed up her throat. He couldn't know. No one could know what she'd been running from for the past 5 years. What she'd been hiding behind suppressants and carefully controlled emotions and a human life that had never quite fit. "I should go," she breathed, scrambling to her feet. "It's late, and the storm isn't safe." He rose with predatory grace, moving to block her path to the door. "The roads will be flooded. You should stay." Stay? The word came out higher than she intended. Stay here, alone with him, while whatever was happening to her body made her feel like she was coming apart at the seams. While his presence seemed to call to something deep inside her that she'd spent years trying to bury. There are guest rooms on the 15th floor. His voice was carefully controlled now, but she could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I'll have security escort you. A crack of thunder shook the building, and the lights went out completely. In the darkness, she heard him curse under his breath. Words in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing them in an eerie red glow that made his face look like something carved from shadow and flame. Isla. Her name was a warning, a plea, a promise all rolled into one. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone. The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. For 3 years, she'd watched him from the safety of her desk, cataloging his moods, learning his preferences, falling slowly and inevitably for the man behind the corporate mask. She'd seen his rare moments of vulnerability, the way his eyes went distant when he thought no one was looking, the careful control that never quite managed to hide the wildness beneath. She'd thought she was the only one keeping secrets. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered. "I know you take your coffee black, but add sugar when you think no one's looking. I know you stay late every Tuesday to donate blood because you think it helps someone. I know you flinch when storms hit, like you're waiting for something to find you." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And I know that right now, you smell like home." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Outside, the storm raged with increasing violence, as if nature itself was responding to the tension building in the small space between their bodies. Isla's heart hammered as she stared up at him, seeing past the corporate facade to the man beneath, dangerous, hungry, and looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. She should run. Should make some excuse and flee before whatever was building between them could explode into something neither could control. But her feet remained rooted to the floor, and all she could think was that after 5 years of running, maybe she was tired of being alone. Maybe some storms were meant to be weathered together. "Kieran," she breathed, and saw something fierce and wild flicker in his storm-gray eyes. The lights flickered back on, but nothing between them would ever be the same. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Isla's pulse thundered in her ears as Kieran's words echoed in her mind. "You smell like home." Home. The word was a knife twisting in her chest. She hadn't had a home in 5 years. Not since that terrible night when everything she'd thought she knew about herself had shattered like glass. "I should clean this up," she said finally, gesturing weakly at the ceramic shards scattered across the floor. Anything to break the intensity of his stare, to put distance between them before she did something catastrophically stupid. "The cleaning crew will handle it." His voice was carefully measured now, but she could hear the strain beneath the control. "You need to tend to that cut." Before she could protest, he was moving toward his private bathroom, returning moments later with a first aid kit that looked suspiciously well-stocked for an executive office. When he knelt beside her again, she caught a scent that made her head spin. Pine and cedar and something wild that called to every suppressed instinct in her body. "Give me your hand," he said softly. She hesitated. The smart thing would be to refuse, to make some excuse and leave before whatever was happening between them could go any further. But as thunder crashed outside and the building seemed to sway with the storm's fury, she found herself placing her injured palm in his. The antiseptic sting was nothing compared to the electricity that shot through her at his touch. His hands were larger than hers, calloused in a way that spoke of activities far removed from boardroom negotiations. There was a gentleness in the way he cleaned the wound that didn't match the predatory grace she'd observed from afar. "You're very careful," she observed, trying to keep her voice steady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've had practice." "With what?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. A shadow of old pain, carefully hidden but not quite buried. "With things that are easily broken." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Isla studied his face, noting the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the careful way he held himself as if constantly braced for impact. She'd always assumed his reputation for ruthless business practices came from ambition, but now she wondered if it might be something else entirely. Protection. Control. The same things she'd been desperately grasping for since she'd started running. "There," he said, securing the bandage with more care than the small wound warranted. But he didn't release her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her wrist where her pulse hammered visibly beneath the skin. "Kieran," she whispered, not sure if it was a warning or a plea. His grip tightened fractionally, and when he looked up at her, she saw something raw and hungry in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I can hear your heartbeat," he said quietly. "It's been driving me mad for months." The confession should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her veins like liquid fire. "That's impossible." "Is it?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Tell me, Isla, what else is impossible? The way you always know when I'm having a difficult day, the way you seem to sense my moods before I speak, the way you flinch every time there's a full moon." Each observation hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so careful, so controlled, but apparently not careful enough. "You've been watching me. I've been trying not to." The honesty in his voice was devastating. "For 3 years, I've been trying to maintain professional distance. But today something changed. Your scent, your presence, everything about you is different. Stronger. Like you're finally becoming who you're meant to be." Panic clawed up her throat. The suppressants. She'd been so distracted by the quarterly reports that she'd forgotten to take her evening dose yesterday. Without the chemicals masking her true nature, whatever she really was must be bleeding through. "I don't know what you think you're sensing, but..." "Don't." The word was sharp enough to cut. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're running from, it's eating you alive. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, like you're waiting for the sky to fall." She tried to pull away, but his hold was implacable. "You don't understand. You can't understand." "Then help me understand." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, and she nearly sobbed at the gentleness of the touch. "Trust me." "Trust you?" The laugh that escaped her was bitter and broken. "You don't even know what I am, what I could be capable of." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding that made her blood run cold. "What you could be capable of," he repeated slowly, "or what you've already done." The question hit too close to home. Suddenly she was back in that moonlit forest 5 years ago, watching in horror as claws extended from her fingertips, and something wild and violent surged through her veins. The memory of blood. So much blood. And the sound of screaming that might have been her own. "I have to go." She wrenched herself free, stumbling backward. This was a mistake. All of this. "Isla, wait." But she was already moving, grabbing her purse and jacket from the chair beside his desk. The storm outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she could feel something inside her responding to its call. Something she'd spent 5 years learning to suppress. "Miss Morrison." His voice stopped her at the door, formal once again, but edged with something that might have been desperation. "The offer stands. The guest room, if you change your mind." She paused with her hand on the door handle, not trusting herself to turn around. If she looked at him now, saw whatever expression was on his face, she might crumble entirely. "Some storms are meant to be weathered alone," she said quietly, echoing his earlier words. "And some storms destroy everything in their path when they're faced in isolation." The warning sent ice through her veins, but she forced herself to keep walking. In the elevator, she pressed her back against the cool metal wall and tried to steady her breathing. But even 40 floors down, she could swear she still felt the weight of his storm-gray eyes on her skin. Outside, the wind whipped through the city streets like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance, she could have sworn she heard the sound of howling. The sound called to something deep in her bones, something that had been sleeping for 5 years, something that was finally, terrifyingly, beginning to wake up. As she stepped into the storm, Isla Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking toward a reckoning she'd been running from for far too long. Behind her, 40 floors up, Kieran Blackwood stood at his office window and watched her disappear into the night, his own carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble around the edges. Chapter 3. Into the Tempest. The rain hit Isla like a physical assault the moment she stepped outside Blackwood Industries. Within seconds, her carefully styled hair was plastered to her skull, and her silk blouse clung to her skin like a second layer. But the cold shock of it was exactly what she needed. Something to ground her, to remind her that she was still human, still in control, still lying to herself. The streets were nearly deserted, most sensible people having taken shelter hours ago when the weather service issued storm warnings. But Isla pressed forward, her heels clicking against wet pavement as she made her way toward the subway station. Each step took her further from the towering glass monument to Kieran's empire. But she could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch on her wrist, could still hear the rough honesty in his voice. "I can hear your heartbeat." A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She'd been so careful, so methodical in her suppression of everything that made her different. The daily medications, the carefully controlled diet, the meditation techniques she'd learned from a therapist who specialized in anger management. 5 years of building a life so ordinary, so thoroughly human, that even she sometimes forgot what lay beneath the surface. But Kieran had seen through it all with those storm-gray eyes. The subway entrance loomed ahead, but as Isla reached for the railing, a sound froze her blood. Howling. Long and mournful, it echoed through the concrete canyons of the city, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw shapes moving on the rooftops. Too large to be human, too fluid to be anything natural. Pack. The word whispered through her mind unbidden, carrying with it a rush of memories she'd spent years trying to bury. The scent of pine needles and damp earth. The feeling of belonging she'd thought she'd never experience again. The terrible, wonderful moment when she'd first felt the change beginning in her bones. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The offer still stands. Top floor. K." She stared at the message, rain blurring the screen. How had he gotten her personal number? And more importantly, why did the idea of turning around and running back to him feel less like surrender and more like coming home? Another howl split the night, closer this time. Close enough that she could hear the longing in it, the call to something wild and free that she'd been denying for too long. Isla closed her eyes and tried to center herself the way her therapist had taught her. Count to 10. Breathe deeply. Remember that you are in control of your reactions. But the techniques that had worked for 5 years felt suddenly flimsy against the storm raging both outside and within her. When she opened her eyes, a man was standing at the far end of the street. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes that seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. But it wasn't his appearance that made her pulse spike. It was his scent. Even through the rain, she caught it. Musk and leather and something distinctly predatory that made every instinct in her body scream danger. The man tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that felt invasive. Then he smiled, and she caught a glimpse of teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. "Isla Morrison," he called out, his voice carrying impossibly well over the storm. "Finally showing your true colors, are we?" She took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the phone in her purse. But even as she did, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. 2 more figures emerging from the shadows of side streets, flanking her with the practiced ease of hunters. "Who are you?" she demanded, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Friends of the family," the first man replied, taking a casual step closer. "Your real family, the one you've been running from for 5 years." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." His smile widened, and there was nothing human in it now. "Did you really think you could hide forever? That the suppressants would mask your scent permanently?" He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. "You smell like home, little wolf, like pack, like everything you've been denying." The same words Kieran had used, but from this man's mouth, they sounded like a threat rather than a promise. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs as pieces clicked into place. The howling she'd been hearing, the shapes on the rooftops, the way her body had been changing despite the medications. "The lunar convergence is in 3 days, the man continued conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than something that made Isla's blood run cold. "Did you think we'd let you miss your first full transformation? After all these years of denying what you are?" "I'm not," she started, but the lie died in her throat. There was no point in pretending anymore. Not when they could clearly scent the truth. "You're coming with us," he said simply. "The pack has been patient long enough. It's time you learned your place." "And if I refuse?" His expression darkened. "Then we'll make the choice for you. Either way, you're coming home." Lightning crashed overhead, and in its brief illumination, Isla saw them for what they truly were. The slight elongation of their features, the predatory grace in their movements, the way their eyes reflected the streetlight like mirrors. They were like her, the thing she'd been running from, the nature she'd been suppressing. But they were also everything she feared about losing control. "Isla." The voice cut through the storm like a blade, and she spun to see Kieran standing in the entrance of his building, still 40 floors down, but somehow commanding the entire street with his presence. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt clinging to his frame, and there was something different about the way he held himself. Something dangerous. "Step away from her," he said quietly, but his voice carried with absolute authority. The first man laughed. "Well, well, Kieran Blackwood, I wondered when you'd show yourself." He turned that predatory smile on Kieran. "This doesn't concern you, Alpha. The girl belongs to us." Alpha. The word sent shock through Isla's system, but even as her mind reeled, she felt something inside her respond to Kieran's presence. The wild thing that had been clawing at her walls all evening settled slightly, as if recognizing something familiar in him. "She belongs to no one," Kieran replied, and there was iron in his voice now. "Least of all a pack of rogues hunting in my territory without permission." The tension in the air became suffocating. Isla found herself caught between 2 forces she didn't understand. 2 sides of a world she'd tried to leave behind. The pack that claimed her by blood, and the man who seemed to claim her by something deeper. Something that felt remarkably like fate. Chapter 4. Territorial lines. The air between the two groups crackled with tension so thick Isla could taste it on her tongue, metallic and sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. She stood frozen in the middle of the street, rain streaming down her face. Caught between forces she was only beginning to understand. Kieran moved with fluid grace, closing the distance between himself and the confrontation with predatory purpose. Each step was measured, controlled, but Isla could sense the coiled violence beneath his corporate facade. When he reached her side, the warmth of his presence cut through the cold like a blade. "Marcus," Kieran acknowledged the lead rogue with a nod that held no respect. "Still playing messenger boy for the Shadowmere pack, I see." Marcus's laugh was harsh. "Still playing human in your glass tower, Blackwood? How noble of you." His gaze flicked between Kieran and Isla, calculating. "Though, I have to admit, I'm curious why the great alpha of the eastern seaboard is so interested in one runaway wolf." Runaway wolf. The words hit Isla like physical blows, confirming what she'd spent 5 years trying to deny. But it was the way Kieran stiffened beside her that made her pulse spike. Not in surprise, but in recognition. He'd known. All along, he'd known what she was. "My reasons are my own," Kieran said quietly. "What matters is that she's under my protection now." Protection? Marcus's smile turned vicious. From what? Her own nature? Her own blood? He addressed Isla directly, his voice taking on a coaxing tone. "You can't run forever, little sister. The Shadowmere pack raised you, trained you, gave you everything. And this is how you repay that loyalty? 5 years of radio silence?" "I never asked for any of it." Isla found her voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "I never asked to be what I am." "None of us did," Marcus replied. "But we make the best of it. We embrace it. We don't spend years pumping ourselves full of suppressants and pretending to be something we're not." His nostrils flared. "Do you have any idea what those chemicals are doing to you? What happens when your body finally rejects them?" A chill ran down Isla's spine that had nothing to do with the rain. "What do you mean?" "The convergence is in 3 days," Marcus continued, ignoring Kieran's warning growl. 3 days until the strongest lunar pull in a century. Your body is already preparing, whether you want it to or not. I can smell it on you. The change beginning. The suppressants won't hold much longer. Isla's hand instinctively went to her abdomen, where she'd been feeling strange, cramping sensations for the past week. She'd attributed it to stress, to irregular meals, and too much caffeine. But now, what happens if I don't? If I can't control it? She whispered. "That's what we're here for," Marcus said gently. "Pack helps pack. Family helps family. You don't have to face this alone." "She's not alone." Kieran's voice cut through the false comfort like ice. "And she's not going anywhere with you." Marcus's expression hardened. "You have no claim here, Blackwood. She's Shadowmere blood. She belongs with us. She belongs wherever she chooses to belong." Kieran stepped slightly in front of Isla, a subtle but unmistakable claiming of space. "And I don't see her choosing to go with the pack that let her run scared for 5 years without lifting a finger to help." "Help?" Marcus snarled. "We gave her space. We respected her choice to deny her nature, even as it went against everything we believe. But there are limits to patience. The convergence won't wait for her emotional readiness." "Then perhaps you should have prepared her better," Kieran replied coldly. "Instead of letting a child face her first transformation alone and traumatized." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Isla saw something flicker in Marcus's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. It was the first crack in his confident facade. "You don't know anything about what happened," Marcus said. but there was less conviction in his voice now. I know enough. Kieran's hand found Isla's elbow, steadying her as another wave of cramping hit. I know she was 18 and terrified. I know she lost control and someone got hurt. And I know your pack's solution was to give her some meditation techniques and expect her to figure out the rest on her own. Isla stared at him in shock. How could he possibly know details she'd never told anyone? Details she'd buried so deep she sometimes convinced herself they were nightmares rather than memories. The girl needs proper guidance, Marcus insisted. She needs to learn control before the convergence, or what? Kieran's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Are you threatening her, Marcus? The two men faced each other across the rain-soaked street, and Isla could feel the power radiating from both of them. But where Marcus's energy felt wild and unpredictable, Kieran's was controlled, focused, like a perfectly balanced blade. I'm stating facts, Marcus replied. An uncontrolled transformation during a lunar convergence can be volatile, dangerous, to her and to anyone nearby. Then it's fortunate she won't be uncontrolled. Kieran's certainty was absolute. She'll have proper guidance, just not from you. Marcus studied them both for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the protective way Kieran positioned himself, on the way Isla unconsciously leaned into his stability. Interesting, he murmured finally. Very interesting indeed. He stepped back, gesturing to his companions. We'll be watching Blackwood. If she hurts someone, anyone, during the convergence, her blood is on your hands. I can live with that. Marcus smiled, sharp and predatory. Can she? With that parting shot, the three rogues melted back into the shadows as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving only the scent of wet concrete and danger behind. Isla's knees nearly buckled with relief, but Kieran's steady grip kept her upright. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of revelations settling between them like stones. You knew, she said finally, her voice barely audible over the rain. All this time, you knew what I was. Yes. Why didn't you say anything? He turned to face her fully, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. Because you weren't ready, and because... He hesitated, then seemed to come to some internal decision. Because I was hoping you'd trust me enough to tell me yourself. Trust. The word tasted bitter. That's rich, considering you've been keeping secrets too. Yes, he admitted simply. I have. The rain continued to fall around them, washing away the last pretense between them. When Kieran spoke again, his voice was soft but carried clearly over the storm. Come back with me, Isla. Let me help you through this. Let me teach you what your pack should have taught you years ago. And what's that? That being what we are isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. Carefully, safely, but embrace nonetheless. Isla looked up at him, at this man who'd been her anchor for 3 years without her realizing it, who'd known her secrets and protected her anyway, and felt something inside her chest crack open. What are we, Kieran? She whispered. His smile was gentle and fierce all at once. That, my dear Isla, is what we're going to find out together. Chapter 5. Sanctuary of Secrets. The elevator to the penthouse seemed to take forever, each floor passing in weighted silence. Isla stood pressed against the far wall, hyper-aware of Kieran's presence beside her, of the way his wet shirt clung to his frame, of the controlled power that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Alpha. The word echoed in her mind, carrying implications she was only beginning to understand. 3 years she'd worked for him, cataloging his moods, anticipating his needs, and never once had she suspected the truth. How many times had she sat across from his desk, taking dictation, while something wild and powerful watched her from behind those storm-gray eyes? Your heart is racing, he observed quietly, not looking at her. Wouldn't yours be? The words came out sharper than intended. I just found out my boss is some kind of supernatural pack leader, and apparently I'm about to undergo a transformation that could hurt people if I can't control it. You won't hurt anyone. His certainty was absolute, infuriating in its confidence. How can you possibly know that? Because I won't let you. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a hallway she'd never seen before. This way. Kieran's penthouse was nothing like she'd imagined. Where his office was all sharp lines and corporate sterility, his home was warm, rich woods and soft leather, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the storm-lashed city below. But it was the scent that hit her hardest. Pine and cedar, and something uniquely him that made her knees weak. Sit, he said, gesturing toward a leather couch positioned near a fireplace that crackled with real flames. You're shivering. She hadn't realized she was. The adrenaline crash was hitting her now, leaving her feeling hollow and unsteady. She sank onto the couch, hyper-aware of how her wet clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin. I'll get you something dry to wear, Kieran said, already moving toward what she assumed was his bedroom. And then we need to talk. Alone for the first time since this nightmare began, Isla allowed herself to really process what had happened. The rogue pack members who'd known her by name, the transformation they'd mentioned, the way her body had been changing despite the suppressants she'd religiously taken every day for 5 years. She pressed her hands to her abdomen, where the cramping had intensified during the confrontation. It felt like something inside her was trying to claw its way out, something that had been dormant for too long. Here. Kieran's voice made her jump. He stood beside the couch holding a soft gray sweater and dark jeans. The bathroom is down the hall if you want privacy. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. For 3 years, she'd maintained professional distance, never allowing herself to truly see him as anything more than her employer. But now, faced with his gentleness, his protection, his willingness to help her through something he had no obligation to handle, she felt walls crumbling that she'd spent years building. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He paused in the act of building up the fire, his broad shoulders tensing. "What do you mean?" "Helping me, protecting me from Marcus and his pack. You barely know me." "Don't I?" He turned to face her and there was something vulnerable in his expression. 3 years, Isla. 3 years of watching you bring me coffee exactly the way I like it without being asked. 3 years of seeing you stay late to help with projects that aren't your responsibility. 3 years of noticing how you flinch during storms, how you take the stairs instead of the elevator during full moons, how you go pale whenever the news mentions animal attacks. Each observation hit her like a physical blow. She'd thought she'd been so careful, so controlled. "You've been cataloging my weaknesses." "I've been cataloging your tells," he corrected gently. "Because from the moment you walked into my office for that interview, something in me recognized something in you. I just couldn't put a name to it until tonight." "And what would you call it now?" His eyes met hers across the firelit room, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. Home. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. It was the same thing he'd said earlier, the same thing Marcus had used to try to lure her back to the pack. But from Kieran's lips, it didn't sound like a cage. It sounded like a promise. "I should change," she said, needing distance before she did something irreversible like crossing the room and finding out what it would feel like to be held by someone who knew her secrets and accepted them anyway. Isla. Her name was a soft command that stopped her at the bathroom door. "Whatever you're afraid of, whatever happened 5 years ago, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore." In the bathroom, she stared at herself in the mirror while stripping out of her soaked clothes. Her reflection looked like a stranger, hair wild from the rain, eyes bright with something between fear and anticipation, skin flushed with awareness she couldn't quite name. The cramping hit again, stronger this time, and she gripped the marble countertop until her knuckles went white. Through the pain, she could swear she felt something shifting inside her, something that had been sleeping for 5 years finally beginning to stir. When she emerged wearing Kieran's clothes, the sweater soft and warm and carrying his scent, he was standing by the windows with 2 steaming mugs. "Tea," he said, offering her one. "With honey. It'll help with the cramping." She accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "How did you know about the cramping?" "Because I went through something similar when I was learning to control my changes." He settled onto the opposite end of the couch, careful to maintain distance. Though, admittedly, mine wasn't complicated by years of chemical suppression. "How long have you been—" She struggled for the right words. "A werewolf?" He said it simply, without shame or hesitation. "I was born to it, 4th-generation alpha bloodline. You? Made, not born." The admission felt like swallowing glass. 5 years ago, I was camping with my college boyfriend when we were attacked. He didn't survive the encounter. Kieran's expression darkened. "The Shadowmere pack found you afterward?" 3 days later, when I came out of the woods covered in blood and fur, having no memory of what I'd done. She took a shaky sip of tea. "They said they were my family now. Said they'd teach me control. But when the time came for my first full transformation..." "You lost control," he finished gently. "I hurt someone. Badly." The words came out in a whisper. "A hiker who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. When I came back to human consciousness and saw what I'd done, I ran. I've been running ever since." "And the suppressants?" "A therapist in Denver who specialized in supernatural trauma. She helped me find a doctor who was willing to prescribe them, no questions asked." Isla stared into her tea. "For 5 years, they worked. I built a normal life, got a normal job, pretended to be normal." "But you were never normal," Kieran said quietly. "You were just suppressed." "Same thing." "No." His voice carried absolute conviction. "Normal implies average, unremarkable. You were never that, Isla. Even before you were turned, even during these past 3 years when you've been trying so hard to be invisible, you've never been normal. You've been extraordinary, trying to fit into a box that was never meant to contain you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. "You don't know what I'm capable of when I lose control." "Then don't lose control." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Let me teach you what the Shadowmere pack should have taught you from the beginning. Let me show you that transformation doesn't have to mean losing yourself. It can mean finding yourself." Outside, thunder rolled across the city, and Isla felt answering rumbles deep in her bones. The convergence was coming whether she was ready or not. She looked at Kieran, this man who'd somehow seen through all her careful deceptions, who offered guidance instead of judgment, who made her feel less like a monster and more like someone worth saving. "Where do we start?" she asked quietly. Chapter 6. Lessons in Control. Kieran set his empty mug aside and studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. "First lesson," he said quietly. "Control begins with acceptance. You can't master something you're trying to deny exists." Isla pulled the soft sweater tighter around herself, inhaling the comforting scent that clung to the fabric. "I've accepted it. Why do you think I've been taking suppressants for 5 years?" "That's not acceptance. That's avoidance." He leaned back against the couch, his posture relaxed but alert. "Tell me what you feel right now. Not what you think you should feel, but what's actually happening in your body." She closed her eyes, focusing inward for the first time in years without immediately pushing the sensations away. cramping, like something inside me is stretching, trying to break free. My skin feels too tight, and there's this restlessness, like I need to move, to run. Good. What else? Your scent. The admission slipped out before she could stop it, heat flooding her cheeks. It's everywhere, and it's making it hard to think clearly. When she opened her eyes, something had shifted in his expression. His pupils had dilated slightly, and she caught the faintest hint of something wild flickering behind his control. "That's the wolf recognizing what it needs," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Safety. Pack. Home. Is that what you are to me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet." His honesty was both reassuring and terrifying. "But I know what you are to me." She waited, hardly daring to breathe. "You're someone worth protecting, worth saving, worth helping find her way back to herself." He stood abruptly, as if the confession had cost him something. "Come on, we're going to start with breathing techniques." "Breathing?" She followed him to the center of the room, where he moved the coffee table aside to create an open space. "That's your grand plan for preventing me from losing control and mauling innocent people? Breath is life, Isla. It's the bridge between human consciousness and wolf instinct. When you panic, what happens to your breathing?" She thought back to the moments of terror she'd experienced over the past 5 years whenever she'd felt the wolf stirring. It gets shallow, fast. Exactly. And when your breathing becomes erratic, your wolf interprets that as a threat response, fight or flight, which makes her want to take over to protect you. He positioned himself across from her, his movements graceful and sure. But if you can control your breathing, you can control the transition between states of being. States of being? Human. Wolf. And the space in between where most of the damage happens. He sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, gesturing for her to mirror his position. The Shadowmere pack probably told you that transformation is about dominance, about forcing the wolf to submit to human will. Something like that. She remembered the brutal training sessions, the alpha wolves who'd pinned her down until she'd learned to suppress every instinct that made her different. They said if I couldn't control the wolf, she'd control me. They were wrong. The quiet conviction in his voice made her look up sharply. The wolf isn't your enemy, Isla. She's another part of you. The goal isn't to dominate her, it's to integrate her. To find harmony between both aspects of your nature. The concept was so radically different from everything she'd been taught that it took her a moment to process. How? We start with breath. Close your eyes and match my rhythm. His voice took on a hypnotic quality, low and soothing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. She tried to follow his lead, but her mind kept racing. What if this didn't work? What if the convergence triggered another violent episode? What if she hurt him the way she'd hurt that hiker 5 years ago? You're thinking too much. His voice was patient but firm. Feel, don't think. What does your wolf want right now? To run, she said immediately. To be outside in the storm. To dot. She hesitated, then forged ahead. To be close to you. Then we'll work with that instead of against it. When she opened her eyes, he had moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Give me your hands. The moment their palms touched, electricity shot up her arms. But instead of the chaotic energy she'd expected, there was something stabilizing about the connection. Her breathing naturally slowed to match his, and the cramping in her abdomen eased slightly. Better? He asked. How are you doing that? Alpha presence. It's not about dominance. It's about creating a safe space for other wolves to exist without feeling threatened. His thumbs traced gentle, circles over her wrists. Your wolf recognizes me as someone who can protect the pack. That allows her to relax instead of staying on constant alert. Is that all I am to you? Just another wolf in your pack? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither seemed ready to fully explore. Kieran's hands tightened fractionally on hers, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. No, he said simply. You're not just another wolf. The admission sent heat spiraling through her, but before she could ask what she was to him, another wave of cramping hit. This one was stronger, accompanied by a sensation like fire racing along her nerve endings. It's getting worse, she gasped. It's getting closer to the surface. That's not the same thing. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Walk with me. He led her to the windows that overlooked the storm-ravaged city. Lightning split the sky as they watched, and Isla felt an answering pulse deep in her bones. The convergence is calling to every supernatural creature within 100 miles, Kieran explained. Your body is preparing whether you want it to or not. The question is whether you'll let fear drive the process or take control of it yourself. What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough? He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. You survived a turning that killed your boyfriend. You've lived for 5 years suppressing a fundamental part of your nature. You've built a life from nothing and maintained control despite being completely untrained. You're stronger than you think, Isla. You just need to stop being afraid of your own power. The sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his touch, the way he looked at her like she was something precious rather than dangerous. It all combined to crack something open inside her chest. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that being a werewolf didn't have to mean being a monster. What happens if this works? She whispered. If I learn control, if I survive the convergence, what then? Then you get to choose who you want to be. Human, wolf, or something beautifully in between. His smile was soft and fierce all at once. But that's a decision for after we get through the next 3 days. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like a promise, and Isla felt something inside her chest unfurl for the first time in years. It might have been hope. Or it might have been the beginning of her transformation into something she'd never imagined she could become. Either way, with Kieran's hands warm against her skin and his storm-gray eyes full of unwavering faith in her strength, she thought she might finally be ready to find out. Chapter 7. The wolf beneath Isla woke to the scent of cedar and rain, disoriented for a moment until she remembered where she was. The guest room in Kieran's penthouse was nothing like her sterile apartment, warm woods, soft fabrics, and windows that showcased the pre-dawn city still recovering from the storm. She'd slept better than she had in months, despite everything. Or perhaps because of it. For the first time in 5 years, she'd fallen asleep without taking her suppressants, and her body felt different, more alive. Like she'd been holding her breath for half a decade and could finally exhale. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Isla, how are you feeling? Kieran's voice through the door sent warmth spiraling through her chest. Better, she called back, surprised to find it was true. Give me 5 minutes. Take your time. I've made breakfast. The simple domesticity of it made her heart clench. When was the last time someone had cooked for her? When was the last time she'd woken up feeling safe instead of constantly alert for danger? In the bathroom, she splashed water on her face and studied her reflection. Her skin looked brighter somehow, her eyes clearer. The constant tension she'd carried in her shoulders for years had eased overnight. Even her hair seemed to have more life to it. She found Kieran in the kitchen, moving with economical grace as he plated what looked like the most perfect omelet she'd ever seen. He'd changed into dark jeans and a gray Henley that clung to his frame in ways that made her mouth go dry. "You look rested," he observed, sliding the plate across the marble counter toward her. "I feel rested, which is strange considering—" She gestured vaguely at the situation they found themselves in. "Not strange. Your body is finally working with your nature instead of against it. Of course you feel better." He poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding cream to hers without asking how she liked it. 3 years of observation, she realized. 3 years of him paying attention to details she'd thought no one noticed. "How do you do that?" she asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Do what?" "Make this feel normal. Like learning to be a werewolf is just another Tuesday morning conversation." His smile was soft and a little sad. "Because for me, it is normal. I've been helping newly turned wolves for over a decade. You're not my first student, Isla." A sharp stab of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy hit her. "How many others have there been?" "Enough to know that each person's journey is unique, but none quite like yours." He leaned against the counter across from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Most wolves I work with were turned recently. You've had 5 years to build walls between yourself and your nature. Breaking down those barriers requires a different approach." "What kind of approach?" "Trust, patience, and a willingness to let yourself be vulnerable." His gray eyes met hers steadily. "All things that don't come easily to someone who's been running as long as you have." The observation hit closer to home than she was comfortable with. "I'm trying." "I know you are. That's why we're going to take the next step today." Which is controlled partial transformation. The words hit her like ice water. Isla set down her coffee mug with hands that had started to shake. "I can't. What if I lose control? What if I hurt you?" "You won't." His certainty was absolute, infuriating in its confidence. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I'll be right there with you. And because partial transformation is about choice, not loss of control. You'll remain fully conscious, fully yourself. You'll just be accessing abilities that have been dormant." She stood abruptly, pacing to the windows that overlooked the city. "The last time I transformed, even partially, someone ended up in the hospital. The last time you transformed, you were terrified, untrained, and completely alone." Kieran's voice was gentle but firm. "This time, you have guidance, support. Someone who knows exactly what you're going through and how to help you through it. And if that's not enough, then we stop. Immediately. No judgment, no pressure. We try again when you're ready." He moved to stand behind her, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel his presence like a shield at her back. "But Isla, the convergence is tomorrow night. If you go into it without any practice integrating your wolf, the shock to your system could be devastating." The reminder sent fear spiking through her. She'd been so focused on learning control that she'd almost forgotten the looming deadline. "Tomorrow?" "The lunar convergence peaks at 11:47 p.m. tomorrow. Your body is already preparing. I can smell the changes in your scent, see it in the way you move. Whether you practice beforehand or not, transformation is coming. The question is whether you meet it as an enemy or an ally." She closed her eyes, trying to center herself the way he'd taught her the night before. But the breathing exercises that had worked so well in the calm of his living room felt inadequate against the magnitude of what he was asking. What would a partial transformation involve exactly? Small changes, enhanced senses first. Hearing, smell, sight. Then maybe claws, just the tips. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would compromise your human consciousness. His reflection appeared beside hers in the window glass. Think of it as dipping your toe in the water instead of jumping into the deep end. And you'll be there the whole time? Every second, I promise. The sincerity in his voice made her turn to face him. He was closer than she'd expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This close, she could see the gold flecks that made his gray irises so mesmerizing, could count the faint lines that spoke of years spent outdoors despite his corporate lifestyle. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she whispered. "Helping me, I mean. You could have just let Marcus take me. It would have been simpler. Simpler, maybe. But not right?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You deserved better than what the Shadowmere Pack gave you. You deserved patience, understanding, proper training. You deserve to learn that being what we are can be a gift instead of a curse. Is that what it is for you? A gift? Most days." His smile was rueful. "Though I'll admit, it's complicated when you're trying to run a Fortune 500 company and attend board meetings during full moons." The unexpected humor surprised a laugh out of her. "How do you manage it?" "Very carefully, and with an excellent assistant who's been covering for my mysterious absences for 3 years without ever asking awkward questions." The realization hit her like lightning. The quarterly reports I always took home to work on during full moon weeks. The business trips you'd cancel at the last minute. The way you'd sometimes come to work looking like you'd spent the night outdoors. "You were protecting me without even knowing it," he confirmed. "Scheduling my meetings, managing my calendar, making sure I had the time and space I needed. You've been taking care of me long before you knew what I was." The confession sent warmth flooding through her chest. All those times she'd thought she was just being a good assistant, she'd actually been helping him navigate his dual nature. They'd been partners in this dance of secrets without either of them fully realizing it. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we find out if that partnership extends to helping each other through transformation." His thumb traced across her lower lip, and she felt her breath catch. "Are you willing to try?" She looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw patience, strength, and something deeper that made her pulse spike. For 5 years, she'd been alone with her fears. But standing here in the morning light, wrapped in his scent and his unwavering faith in her strength, she felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's try." Chapter 8. First Touch of the Wild. They moved to the living room an hour later, after Isla had consumed every bite of breakfast and 2 full cups of coffee. Nervous energy thrummed through her veins, but beneath the anxiety was something else. Anticipation. For the first time in 5 years, she was about to stop running from what she was and take a step toward embracing it. Kieran had cleared the furniture to the edges of the room, creating an open space on the plush carpet. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the air and making everything feel less ominous than it had in her imagination. "Remember," he said, settling cross-legged on the carpet across from her. "This isn't about forcing anything. It's about invitation. You're asking your wolf to show herself, not demanding she submit." Isla nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "And if she doesn't want to cooperate, then we respect that and try again later. But I don't think that will be a problem." His smile was encouraging. "Your wolf has been sleeping for 5 years. She's probably eager to stretch." The thought made Isla's stomach flutter with something between terror and excitement. "Where do we start?" "Close your eyes. Center yourself with the breathing we practiced. But this time, instead of trying to calm your wolf, I want you to acknowledge her presence. Feel for her in your mind." Isla closed her eyes and tried to follow his instructions. The breathing came easier now, her body naturally falling into the rhythm they'd established. But feeling for her wolf, that was terrifying territory she'd spent years avoiding. "I don't know how," she admitted. "Yes, you do. You've been suppressing her, which means you know exactly where she is." Kieran's voice was patient, hypnotic. Think about the moments when you've felt her stirring, during storms, around full moons, when you're angry or afraid. What does that feel like? She thought back to the previous night, to the way her body had responded to the thunder and lightning. Like fire in my veins, like something pacing inside my chest, wanting out. Good. Now instead of pushing that feeling away, follow it. See where it leads. Taking a shaky breath, Isla turned her attention inward for the first time in years without immediately throwing up mental barriers. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. A presence in her mind that felt both foreign and intimately familiar, like meeting a sister she'd forgotten she had. There you are. A voice that was hers but not hers whispered in her thoughts. I've been waiting. Isla's eyes snapped open, heart hammering. She spoke to me. Kieran's expression grew intent. What did she say? That she's been waiting. The words came out barely above a whisper. She doesn't sound angry. I expected anger. Why would she be angry? Because I've been drugging her into silence for 5 years. Because I've denied her existence. Because I've been ashamed of what she is. She knows you were afraid. She knows you were protecting both of you the only way you knew how. Kieran leaned forward slightly, his presence steady and reassuring. Try talking to her. Not with words, but with intention. Let her know you're ready to work together. Isla closed her eyes again, reaching tentatively toward that presence in her mind. It felt like approaching a wild animal, one that could either bite or purr depending on how she handled the encounter. I'm sorry, she thought toward the wolf. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle what happened, and I thought keeping you buried was the only way to keep people safe. The response came not in words, but in emotions. Understanding, forgiveness, and an overwhelming sense of longing. The wolf didn't want to hurt people any more than Isla did. She just wanted to exist, to be acknowledged, to be part of the whole, instead of a shameful secret. She forgives me, Isla breathed, tears she hadn't expected sliding down her cheeks. Of course she does. She's you, Isla. Would you forgive yourself for being afraid? The question hit deeper than expected. Would she? After 5 years of self-recrimination and shame, the idea of self-forgiveness felt radical. Now, Kieran continued softly, ask her to show you something small. Enhanced hearing, maybe. Or scent. Isla reached out mentally to her wolf, forming the request without words. The response was immediate, a rush of sensation that made her gasp. Suddenly she could hear everything. Kieran's steady heartbeat, the whisper of air through the building's ventilation system, the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. She could smell the lingering traces of their breakfast, the leather of the furniture, the rain that still clung to the windows. And underneath it all, Kieran's scent. Not just the cedar and pine she'd noticed before, but layers of complexity that spoke to something primal in her brain. Safety. Strength. Home. How do you feel? He asked, and she could hear the careful control in his voice, the way he was monitoring her reaction. Overwhelmed, but good overwhelmed? Like I've been walking around half deaf and half blind without realizing it. She opened her eyes, and even her vision seemed sharper, colors more vivid. Is this how you experience the world all the time? More or less. You learn to filter after a while, to focus on what's important, and let the rest fade to background noise. He was watching her with something that might have been pride. You're doing beautifully. It doesn't hurt, she said wonderingly. I expected it to hurt. Pain comes from fighting the change, not embracing it. You're working with your nature instead of against it. He held out his hand, palm up. Try claws now. Just the tips. This request felt more dangerous, more reminiscent of that terrible night 5 years ago. But her wolf's presence in her mind was calm, controlled, nothing like the wild panic she remembered from her first transformation. Isla focused on her fingertips, asking her wolf to show her what she was capable of. The sensation was strange. Not painful, but definitely foreign. A slight burning, a sense of extension, and then she looked down to find her nails had extended into sharp, curved claws. Not the terrifying talons from her nightmares, but elegant instruments that looked almost natural on her hands. "Perfect," Kieran said softly. "Now try retracting them." The retraction was easier than the extension, her claws sliding back into normal fingernails with barely a thought. "I can't believe how simple that was," she breathed. "Because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're integrating." He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hands in his. How does it feel to touch someone while partially transformed? The contact sent electricity shooting up her arms, but it was different now. More intense, more immediate. She could feel his pulse through his palms, could sense the careful control he was exercising over his own wolf. "You're holding back," she realized. "I'm being careful. There's a difference." "Show me," she said impulsively. "I want to see your wolf." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hunger. "Isla punto punto. Please, I've been vulnerable with you. Let me see who you really are." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then something shifted in his expression, a subtle relaxation of the iron control he maintained. His canine teeth elongated slightly, and his eyes took on an otherworldly gleam. The scent of him intensified, becoming wilder, more primal. But it was the way he looked at her that stole her breath, like she was something precious and dangerous all at once, something worth protecting and worth claiming. "This is who I am," he said quietly, his voice rougher now. "Human and wolf, civilized and wild. Does it frighten you?" She studied his partially transformed features, the subtle changes that revealed the predator beneath the businessman's facade. She should be afraid. Every rational part of her mind said she should be terrified. Instead, she felt a deep, bone-deep recognition. This was her alpha, her guide, her... "No," she whispered. "It doesn't frighten me at all." His smile revealed those elongated canines, and something hot and primal flashed in his eyes. "Good," he said softly. "Because tomorrow night, you're going to need to trust this side of me completely." The reminder of the convergence sent a shiver through her, but for the first time since this all began, it wasn't entirely from fear. Tomorrow night, she would face her first full transformation in 5 years. But she wouldn't face it alone. Chapter 9. The space between the rest of the day passed in a blur of practice and discovery. Kieran guided Isla through increasingly complex partial transformations, enhanced reflexes that made her feel like she was dancing with gravity, night vision that turned shadows into detailed landscapes, and an acute sense of smell that revealed the emotional states of everyone in the building below. By evening, she felt more connected to her body than she had in years. More whole. The constant tension she'd carried since her turning had melted away, replaced by a sense of rightness that went deeper than mere comfort. "You're a natural," Kieran observed as they took a break on his terrace, the city spread out below them like a glittering tapestry. "Most wolves take weeks to achieve the level of control you've mastered in a single day." Isla stretched her arms above her head, marveling at the fluid grace her body had found. "Maybe I just had a good teacher. Or maybe you were never as out of control as you thought you were." He leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Fear has a way of distorting our perception of events." The observation hit closer to home than she was comfortable admitting. You think I imagined how bad it was? That hiker? I think a terrified 18-year-old girl who'd just lost her boyfriend and undergone a traumatic transformation might not be the most reliable narrator of her own story. His voice was gentle but firm, especially when the only people around to help her process the experience had their own agenda. What do you mean? The Shadowmere Pack has a reputation for harsh training methods, breaking down newly turned wolves and rebuilding them in the Pack's image. It's effective for creating obedient soldiers, but devastating for individual growth. He turned to face her fully. Tell me exactly what they told you about that night. Isla wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening air. That I'd lost control completely. That I'd gone feral and attacked without provocation. That if they hadn't found me when they did, I might have killed someone else. And how much of that night do you actually remember? Almost nothing, just fragments, blood, screaming, the taste of copper in my mouth. She shuddered. When I woke up 3 days later, they filled in the blanks. Convenient. Kieran's voice had taken on a hard edge. And the hiker's injuries? Severe lacerations to his arm and shoulder. He survived, but... She trailed off, noticing the way Kieran's expression had shifted. What is it? Lacerations to the arm and shoulder, he repeated slowly. Not the throat or chest, where a feral wolf would instinctively target. Not life-threatening areas. What are you saying? I'm saying that a wolf who'd truly lost control, who'd gone completely feral, doesn't leave survivors. The fact that you injured but didn't kill suggests you retained more awareness than the Shadowmere Pack led you to believe. The possibility hit her like a physical blow. But I felt so out of control, so violent. Of course you did. You'd just watched your boyfriend die, probably felt responsible for not being able to protect him. You were grieving, traumatized, and experiencing your first transformation with no guidance. Anyone would have felt out of control. He reached out slowly, taking her hands in his. But there's a difference between feeling out of control and actually being out of control. Isla stared at him, trying to process the implications of what he was suggesting. 5 years of shame, 5 years of believing she was a monster barely contained by suppressants and willpower. What if it had all been built on a foundation of lies? Why would they tell me it was worse than it was? Because frightened wolves are easier to control. If you believed you were one moment away from becoming a mindless killer, you'd be grateful for their guidance, dependent on their structure. You'd never question their methods or consider leaving the pack. Except I did leave. Because despite their best efforts, you're stronger than they gave you credit for. His thumbs traced circles over her knuckles. You trusted your instincts over their propaganda. That takes courage. The validation should have felt good, but instead it left her reeling. 5 years, she whispered. 5 years of thinking I was a monster. You're not a monster, Isla. You never were. His voice was fierce with conviction. You're a wolf who was never properly taught what that means. There's a difference. Before she could respond, a new scent hit her enhanced senses. Something sharp and familiar that made her wolf stir uneasily. She turned toward the terrace entrance just as her phone buzzed with an incoming text. The message was from an unknown number. Beautiful evening for a hunt. See you tomorrow night. M. Marcus, she breathed, showing Kieran the screen. His expression darkened as he read the message. He's close. I can smell him now too. How close? Close enough to be watching us. Kieran's body had shifted into a state of alert readiness, every line of him radiating controlled menace. Close enough to be a problem. Isla's hard-won confidence wavered. What does he want? You. And now that he's seen how well you're progressing, he wants you more than ever. Kieran moved to shield her from the sightlines of the surrounding buildings. A wolf who can achieve your level of control with minimal training? That's a valuable asset to any pack. I'm not an asset. I'm a person. I know that. You know that. But Marcus sees things differently. He guided her back inside, immediately moving to close the curtains and check the security system. The convergence is tomorrow night. He's running out of time to claim you before you're fully bonded to... He stopped abruptly. Bonded to what? Nothing. I misspoke. But there was something in his expression, a careful blankness that suggested he was hiding something significant. Kieran. She moved to block his path, looking up into those storm-gray eyes. Bonded to what? For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. To a pack? To a territory? To an alpha? His gaze met hers steadily. The convergence doesn't just trigger transformation, Isla. It also awakens supernatural bonds that have been dormant. Mate bonds. Pack bonds. Territorial claims. The words sent heat spiraling through her even as they raised a dozen new questions. And you think Marcus is worried about me forming those bonds with someone other than the Shadowmere pack? I think Marcus is worried about you forming those bonds with me. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. And are we? Forming bonds? What do you think? He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You tell me what you feel when you look at me. She didn't have to think about the answer. It rose from some deep, primal place that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct. Home, she whispered. Safety. Like you're mine and I'm yours, and everything else is just details. That's a mate bond forming, he said quietly. And tomorrow night, when the convergence peaks, it's going to solidify into something unbreakable. Unless Marcus gets to me first. He won't. The promise was absolute, backed by an alpha's authority. I won't let him. What if I can't fight him? What if I'm not strong enough? Then you won't fight him alone. Kieran's hands came up to frame her face, and she could see gold flickering in his gray eyes. Tomorrow night, you'll have me. You'll have my strength, my protection, my pack bonds to draw on. Marcus might be determined, but he's not prepared for what will become together. And what's that? His smile was soft and fierce and full of promises that made her pulse spike. Unbreakable, he said simply. Outside, somewhere in the maze of buildings and shadows, Marcus was watching and waiting. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Isla wasn't afraid of what tomorrow night would bring. She was ready to find out exactly what she and Kieran could become when they stopped holding back. Chapter 10. The Night of Convergence. The lunar convergence began at sunset. Isla felt it in her bones the moment the sun disappeared behind the Manhattan skyline. A deep, thrumming pull that seemed to originate from the earth itself and resonate through every cell in her body. She stood at Kieran's living room windows, watching the first hints of the massive moon rise over the city, and tried to keep her breathing steady. It started, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kieran moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the careful control he was exercising over his own response to the convergence. How do you feel? Like I'm coming apart at the seams, like every nerve ending is on fire. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, seeking relief from the fever building under her skin. Is this normal? For someone experiencing their first guided transformation? Yes. His hands settled on her shoulders, and the contact sent electricity shooting through her already hypersensitive nervous system. Your body is remembering what it was meant to be. The moon climbed higher, impossibly large and bright, seeming to pulse with an energy that called to something deep in Isla's DNA. She could hear howling in the distance, other wolves responding to the same ancient call. But beneath the symphony of the wild, she caught something else that made her blood run cold. "They're coming," she breathed. Kieran's hands tightened on her shoulders. "I know. I can smell them." "How many?" "6? Maybe 7? His voice was grim. Marcus brought reinforcements. The security system chimed softly, and Kieran moved to check the monitors. On the screens, Isla could see figures moving through the building's lobby, not employees who would have used keycards, but intruders who'd somehow bypassed the front desk. "They're in the building," Kieran said, his voice taking on the hard edge of command. "We need to move." "Move where?" "This is the top floor." "The roof." He was already in motion, pulling gear from a hidden closet she'd never noticed before. "I have a backup plan." "What kind of backup plan?" "The kind that involves trusting me completely." He handed her a dark jacket and boots. "Put these on. We're going to transform, and we're going to do it together." The idea sent panic spiking through her. "Kieran, I've never done a full transformation. What if I lose control? What if I hurt you?" "You won't." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Look at me, Isla. Really look at me." She did, and what she saw there steadied her more than any words could have. Absolute faith. Unwavering confidence. The kind of trust she'd spent 5 years believing she didn't deserve. "You are not the frightened girl who lost control 5 years ago," he said quietly. "You are a strong, capable woman who has learned to integrate both sides of her nature. You are my equal, my partner, and my mate. And together, we are unbreakable." The elevator chimed in the distance. Their pursuers were rising through the building, probably taking the express route to the penthouse. They had minutes, maybe less. "Okay," Isla breathed. "What do I need to do?" "Follow my lead, trust your instincts, and remember that transformation isn't about losing yourself. It's about becoming more yourself than you've ever been." He led her to the stairwell that accessed the roof, his movements fluid and sure. The convergence will make the change easier, more natural. Let it carry you instead of fighting it. They climbed the stairs quickly, Isla's enhanced hearing picking up the sound of forced entry 40 floors below. By the time they reached the roof access door, she could feel the transformation beginning whether she willed it or not. Her skin felt too tight. Her bones ached with the promise of change, and her vision had sharpened until she could see every detail of the moonlit cityscape spread out below. "It's happening," she gasped, doubling over as the first wave of true transformation hit her. "I know. I'm right here." Kieran's own change was more controlled, but no less dramatic. She watched in fascination as his features shifted, becoming wilder, more predatory. His eyes took on an otherworldly gleam, and when he smiled, she caught the flash of elongated canines. "Don't fight it. Let it flow through you." The pain she'd expected never came. Instead, there was a sense of rightness, of coming home to herself after years of exile. Her bones stretched and reformed, her muscles expanded, and her senses exploded into hyperclarity. But through it all, she remained herself. Isla Morrison, secretary turned werewolf, woman who'd found her place in the world by accepting all the parts of herself she'd tried to deny. When the transformation completed, she stood on 4 legs for the first time in 5 years and felt nothing but power. "Beautiful," Kieran's voice came through their mental link, and she turned to see him in his wolf form, massive, dark-furred, with those same storm-gray eyes that had captivated her in human form. "You're absolutely beautiful." The mental connection was new, intimate in a way that made her soul sing. She could feel his emotions, his thoughts, the bone-deep satisfaction he felt at seeing her fully transformed and in control. The bond, she realized, understanding flooding through her. This is what you meant about mate bonds. Among other things, he confirmed, moving to stand beside her. Are you ready to show Marcus what happens when he threatens what's mine? The roof access door burst open before she could respond, and 6 wolves poured onto the rooftop, larger than her, more experienced, led by Marcus in a form that spoke of decades of transformation experience. So beautiful, Marcus's mental voice was oily, invasive in a way that made her skin crawl. And so wasted on a corporate alpha who's forgotten what it means to be wild. I haven't forgotten anything, Kieran replied, his mental voice carrying absolute authority. But you've forgotten the most important rule of pack dynamics. Which is, never threaten an alpha's mate. What happened next was less a fight than a demonstration. Kieran moved with fluid grace and devastating efficiency, his corporate restraint replaced by pure predatory instinct. But what surprised Isla was her own response. Instead of cowering or losing control, she found herself moving in perfect synchronization with him, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's actions with supernatural precision. They weren't just fighting as individuals. They were fighting as a mated pair, and the difference was devastating. Within minutes, Marcus's pack was retreating, their leader limping and bloodied, his confident superiority replaced by something that looked remarkably like fear. This isn't over, Marcus snarled as his pack melted into the shadows. Yes, Kieran replied quietly. It is. As the last of the intruders disappeared into the night, Isla found herself alone on the rooftop with her mate, the moon overhead blessing their union with silver light. The transformation back to human form was as natural as the change to wolf had been, leaving her standing naked and unashamed in Kieran's arms. How do you feel? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. She considered the question seriously. For the first time in 5 years, she felt whole, complete. Like all the broken pieces of herself had finally found their way back together. Free, she said simply. His smile was radiant. Good. Because this is just the beginning. As he kissed her under the convergence moon, Isla Morrison realized she was no longer running from her nature. She was finally running toward her future. Chapter 11. After. The storm dawn found them wrapped in each other's arms on Kieran's living room couch, watching the sun paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and rose. Isla had never felt so at peace in her entire life, sated, complete, and utterly transformed in ways that went far beyond the supernatural. The mate bond hummed contentedly between them, a warm presence in the back of her mind that made her feel less alone than she had since childhood. Through it, she could sense Kieran's emotions, satisfaction, protectiveness, and an overwhelming tenderness that made her chest ache in the best possible way. No regrets? He asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her bare shoulder. About which part? The transformation? The bond? Or the fact that I'm probably going to need a new job since sleeping with my boss is generally frowned upon in corporate settings? His laugh rumbled through his chest, and she felt the vibration against her cheek. I think we can work something out. Perhaps a promotion is in order. To what? Director of Supernatural Affairs? Partner? He said simply, and the word carried weight that had nothing to do with business hierarchies. In every sense that matters. The offer sent warmth flooding through her. After 5 years of hiding, of feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, the idea of being truly partnered with someone who knew all her secrets and accepted them completely was almost too good to believe. What would that look like exactly? She asked, tilting her head to study his face in the morning light. However you want it to look. We could expand Blackwood Industries to include supernatural consulting, help other newly turned wolves, provide resources for integration. Or we could step back from the corporate world entirely, focus on pack building and territory management. His hand stilled on her shoulder. The choice is yours, Isla. All of it. And if I want both? The business side and the supernatural side? Then we do both. His smile was soft and sure. We have eternity to figure it out. Eternity. The word should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt like a promise. No more running, no more hiding, no more pretending to be something she wasn't. Just infinite time to explore who she could become with someone who understood both halves of her nature. Her phone buzzed from the coffee table, interrupting the peaceful moment. The screen showed a text from an unknown number, and Isla felt Kieran tense beside her as they both read the message. Congratulations on your bonding. The Shadowmere Pack wishes you well in your new life. Consider our business concluded. M. Well, Kieran said dryly. That's surprisingly gracious of him. You think he means it? I think Marcus is a survivor above all else. He knows when to cut his losses. Kieran sat up, pulling her with him. Besides, challenging a bonded pair is dangerous under the best circumstances. Challenging one with alpha blood is suicidal. Alpha blood? Something I should have mentioned earlier. He had the grace to look slightly sheepish. The mate bond doesn't just connect us emotionally and mentally. It also shares certain abilities. You now have access to alpha authority, alpha strength, alpha healing. You're not just my mate. You're my equal in every way that matters. The revelation should have been shocking, but somehow it felt right. She'd felt the change during their confrontation with Marcus, the way power had flowed through her like electricity through a conduit. She'd attributed it to adrenaline and desperation, but now she understood it was something far more permanent. How long have you known? She asked. Known that you had alpha potential? Since the first day you walked into my office and somehow made me completely reorganize my filing system without saying a single word about how disorganized it was. His grin was boyish and completely unrepentant. I've been waiting 3 years for you to figure out your own power. And you never said anything? Would you have believed me? 3 days ago, you thought you were a monster barely held in check by pharmaceuticals. If I'd told you then that you were actually a natural alpha who'd been suppressed by a manipulative pack, you'd have had me committed. He had a point. Even now, with the evidence of her own abilities fresh in her memory, it was hard to reconcile this new understanding of herself with the woman who'd spent 5 years in hiding. So what happens now? She asked. Do we need to register with some supernatural authority? File paperwork with the werewolf equivalent of the IRS? Nothing so bureaucratic, but we should probably make some social calls. Let the other packs in the territory know there's a new mated pair in the city. Establish diplomatic relations, that sort of thing. He paused, studying her expression. Unless you'd rather avoid the supernatural community entirely. We could relocate somewhere more isolated. No. The answer came without hesitation. I've spent 5 years hiding from what I am. I'm done with that. If I'm going to be a werewolf, I want to be a werewolf. Pack politics and all. Even if it means dealing with territorial disputes and supernatural drama. Especially then. Someone needs to look out for the newly turned wolves who don't have the luxury of finding patient alpha mentors. Someone needs to make sure they get proper guidance instead of fear-based indoctrination. She met his eyes steadily. I want to be part of the solution. Pride flowed through their bond, warm and golden. Have I mentioned that I love you? The words hit her like lightning, sudden and illuminating. They hadn't said it yet, though the emotion had been implicit in everything they'd shared over the past few days. But hearing it spoken aloud, feeling the truth of it resonate through their supernatural connection, made it real in a way that stole her breath. I love you too, she whispered, the admission feeling like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promises for their future. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Isla could feel the wolf stirring beneath her skin. not with panic or fear, but with contentment and desire. "I have a confession," she said against his lips. "What's that?" "I used to have fantasies about you. During our business meetings, I'd imagine what it would be like if you lost that perfect corporate control and showed me who you really were underneath." His eyes darkened, pupils dilating with interest. "And how does the reality compare to your fantasies?" "Better," she said honestly. "So much better than I ever imagined." "Good," he murmured, his voice taking on that rough quality that made her pulse spike. "Because I have a few fantasies of my own that we haven't explored yet." "Such as?" "Taking you to the pack house in the Catskills, showing you what it's like to run free in the mountains, making love to you under the stars where we don't have to worry about neighbors or noise complaints." The images he painted sent heat spiraling through her. "When do we leave?" "Whenever you're ready. We have all the time in the world. All the time in the world." After 5 years of living day to day, afraid to make long-term plans or form lasting connections, the promise of forever felt like the greatest gift imaginable. Outside, the city was waking up. Millions of people starting their days, most of them blissfully unaware that werewolves walked among them. But here, in this sanctuary they'd built together, Isla finally understood what home felt like. It wasn't a place. It wasn't even a person. It was the feeling of being completely known and completely accepted. It was the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. It was love in its purest, most transformative form. And for the first time in her life, Isla Morrison was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 12. Full circle, 6 months later. The scent hit Isla the moment she stepped out of the elevator at Blackwood Industries. Fear, confusion, and the unmistakable musk of a newly turned wolf trying desperately to suppress her nature. She followed the trail to the reception area, where a young woman sat rigidly in one of the leather chairs, her knuckles white as she gripped a folder of what were probably medical records. "Sarah Chen," Isla approached with the same careful calm Kieran had once shown her. "I'm Isla Morrison. Thank you for coming in." The woman looked up with eyes that held the same haunted quality Isla remembered seeing in her own mirror for 5 years. "Ms. Morrison? I thought I was meeting with Mr. Blackwood." "You are. I'm his partner." The word still sent a thrill through her, even after 6 months of using it. "We work together on all cases involving supernatural integration." Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. "Is that what we're calling it? Integration?" She gestured to herself with shaking hands. "I haven't slept in 3 weeks. I can hear my neighbors' conversations through 6 inches of drywall. Yesterday, I accidentally crushed a coffee mug just by picking it up. I'm falling apart, and no one will believe me when I tell them what happened." "I believe you." Isla settled into the chair across from her, remembering her own desperate search for someone who would understand. "And I can help you. We both can." "Both?" Kieran, Mr. Blackwood, is also a werewolf. 4th generation alpha. I was turned 5 years ago under circumstances similar to yours. She kept her voice gentle, letting the words sink in. "You're not going crazy, Sarah. You're not dangerous. You're just learning to be something new, and no one's taught you how." The hope that flickered in Sarah's eyes was painfully familiar. "You really understand? More than you know." Isla smiled, thinking of all the newly turned wolves who'd found their way to the offices of Blackwood Industries over the past 6 months. "Tell me about the night you were attacked." As Sarah began her story, a camping trip gone wrong, a boyfriend who hadn't survived, 3 days of missing memories. Isla felt her heart clench with recognition. The details were different, but the emotional landscape was achingly familiar. The guilt, the fear, the desperate need for someone to tell her she wasn't a monster. The pack that found me, Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. They said I was dangerous, that I needed their guidance to keep from hurting people. But their training methods... She shuddered. I ran before they could finish teaching me whatever they thought I needed to know. The Shadowmere pack? Isla guessed. Sarah nodded miserably. You know them? We've had dealings. Isla's tone was diplomatically neutral. Marcus and his pack had kept their word about leaving her alone, but they hadn't changed their methods. If anything, they'd become more aggressive in their recruitment of newly turned wolves, preying on their fear and desperation. They're not the only option, Sarah. There are better ways to learn control. Like what? Like integration instead of suppression. Like working with your wolf instead of fighting her. Like understanding that being what we are can be a gift instead of a curse. Isla stood, extending her hand. Would you like to learn? The transformation in Sarah's expression was immediate and profound. For the first time since she'd walked into the office, she looked like she might actually believe there was hope for her future. Yes, she whispered. Please. Isla led her down the hall to what had once been a conference room and was now something between a sanctuary and a training space. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, and an atmosphere designed to promote calm rather than corporate efficiency. Kieran was waiting for them, his presence as steady and reassuring as always. Sarah, he said, rising from his chair with that fluid grace that spoke of perfect integration between his human and wolf natures. I'm Kieran. Isla's told me about your situation. We're going to help you through this. Just like that? Sarah's voice was small, disbelieving. You don't even know me. I know enough, Kieran replied gently. I know you're brave enough to run from a situation that felt wrong. I know you're strong enough to survive a turning that kills most people. And I know you deserve better than fear-based training that treats your wolf like an enemy to be conquered. As Kieran began explaining the breathing techniques that had been Isla's first step toward integration, she felt the familiar warmth of pride flow through their mate bond. This was what they'd built together over the past 6 months. A sanctuary for wolves like them. A place where newly turned supernaturals could learn that they weren't monsters or mistakes, but people with extraordinary gifts that simply required proper guidance. The business side of Blackwood Industries continued to thrive, but this work felt more important than any corporate deal they'd ever closed. Every wolf they helped was a life saved, a future reclaimed, a small victory against the fear and ignorance that had shaped both their early experiences with supernatural transformation. How do you do it? Sarah asked during a break in their session. Balance everything? The human world and the wolf world? Isla and Kieran exchanged a look loaded with shared understanding and affection. You stop seeing them as separate worlds, Isla explained. Human and wolf aren't two different people sharing one body. They're different aspects of the same person. The goal isn't to choose between them, it's to become whole. And it helps, Kieran added with a smile that made Isla's pulse skip, to have the right partner, someone who understands both sides of your nature and loves all of them equally. Sarah looked between them, noting the way they moved in perfect synchronization, the way their eyes found each other constantly. The sense of completeness that radiated from their bond. Are you mates? She asked. We are, Isla confirmed, no longer shy about claiming what they'd built together. But that's not a requirement for integration. Some wolves find their balance in solitude, others in pack bonds, still others in human relationships with supernatural understanding partners. The key is finding what works for you. What works for us, Kieran corrected gently, is partnership, in every sense of the word. As the session continued, Isla found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a terrified secretary running from her own nature, convinced she was a monster barely held in check by suppressants and willpower. Now she was a confident alpha female, co-running a supernatural consulting firm, helping other wolves find the integration and acceptance she'd once thought impossible. The transformation had been about more than just learning to shapeshift. It had been about learning to love herself, all of herself, and finding someone who could do the same. When Sarah left their offices 3 hours later, she looked like a different person. The rigid fear had been replaced by cautious hope, the desperate suppression by the first tentative steps toward acceptance. She had their direct phone numbers, an appointment for follow-up training, and most importantly, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Another success story, Kieran observed as they watched her walk toward the elevators with something approaching confidence. Another life saved, Isla corrected. Another wolf who gets to discover what she's truly capable of instead of spending years hiding from herself. Speaking of discovering what we're capable of, Kieran moved to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. I got the final permits for the packhouse expansion today. Construction starts next month. The residential wing for newly turned wolves. Among other things. His voice took on a note of carefully controlled excitement. There's also going to be a nursery wing. Isla spun in his arms, her heart skipping at the implication. Kieran, I know we haven't talked about it specifically, but the way you are with the newly turned wolves, the way you nurture and protect them. His smile was soft and wondering. You're going to be an incredible mother, Isla. When we're ready. If we're ready. The future he painted sent warmth flooding through her. Little ones with storm-gray eyes and stubborn chins, teaching them to embrace both sides of their nature from the very beginning, building the kind of pack family she'd never thought she deserved. I love you, she said, the words carrying all the amazement she still felt at having found this life, this love, this sense of belonging she'd thought was lost forever. I love you too, he replied, kissing her with the same reverence he'd shown that first night under the convergence moon. My partner, my mate, my home. As evening painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and crimson, Isla Morrison, alpha female, supernatural consultant, and woman who'd finally learned to love every part of herself, looked out at the city that had once felt like a hiding place, and now felt like the center of her universe. She'd spent 5 years running from her nature, convinced that being a werewolf meant being a monster. But standing in Kieran's arms, surrounded by the work they'd built together and the future they were planning, she finally understood the truth. Being a werewolf didn't make her a monster. It made her extraordinary. And extraordinary, she'd learned, was exactly what she was meant to be.